On behalf of the Mendoza College of Business, the Center for Ethics and Culture, and the O'Brien Smith Leadership Program, welcome to this evening's lecture. My name is Tanya Murphy. I'm a member of the Business Law faculty here at the Mendoza College of Business. It gives me great pleasure to welcome again to Notre Dame this evening's speaker, Professor Michael Novak, the George Frederick Jewett Scholar in Religion, Philosophy, and Public Policy at the American Enterprise Institute. Educated at Stonehill College, the Gregorian University in Rome, and Harvard, Professor Novak has served on the faculties of Harvard, Stanford, Syracuse University, and Notre Dame. He has served twice as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and also as Ambassador to the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. In 1994, he was awarded the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion and delivered the Templeton Address at Westminster Abbey. Professor Novak researches the three systems of the free society: the free polity, the free economy, and the culture of liberty, and their springs in religion and philosophy. He is the author of 27 influential books, including Business as a Calling, which many of you have read, and his latest, No One Sees God. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Professor Michael Novak, who will speak about business.
A moment to get myself hooked up here, but be with you. I'm very happy to be back again. I think this is now the fifth year of these lectures. And in the past 4 lectures, I've spoken about business as a noble vocation, a vocation in which you don't partake just because you want to make a buck, although that's perfectly a good reason to do it. Somebody's got to. And not only for that reason, but also because it's the central vocation for social justice in our time. If the poor are going to move out of poverty, they have to have jobs. And it's the business of business to create jobs, to create new goods and new services or new ways to deliver them, and hire people. Otherwise, the alternative is to be serfs dependent on the state, a kind of a continued slavery to the state. Business, I've said, is the best hope of the poor. In fact, it's the only hope. As people move out of agriculture by the millions, by the tens of millions, and move toward the cities. And it's also the best hope of democracy, because democracy can't flourish unless there is a steady reduction in poverty, unless people love the system of which they are a part, and in which they have resources to do the sorts of things they know need to be done, they want to do, from the Boy Scouts to the Red Cross, to taking ads in a yearbook. So much to be done. And where will people get that money unless they're employed? Otherwise, you have to turn to the state for everything. And again, you're a kind of serf or slave of the state. I want to make a comment second. I'm going to make 13 comments at all, and they'll be very quick, each one, but the first one about business as a vocation. The second is one about Catholic social thought. The reason that I'm here, that Dean Wu wanted me to come, is to join the pursuits of a Catholic reflection on, out of theology and out of philosophy, and out of social sciences for that matter, on polity and economy and culture. It's one of the characteristics of Catholic social thought, not usually stressed, but very important, that it's always learning. It's absorbing. It's zigzagging like climbing a mountain often in order to get a better view. At one point in the early 20th century, because the 4 or 5 democracies in Europe were intent on destroying the church, and not just the Catholic Church, but religion in the public life, Catholic social teaching was negative about democracy. And then as the human rights abuses mounted in the 20th century, the Catholic Church decided, with all its faults, democracy is a far better system for relieving people from torture, freeing them from torture, and protecting their rights than any other. And it has become, as Samuel Huntington of Harvard pointed out, perhaps the single great protector of democracy around the world in so many different nations, the single most constant voice. But that's a new lesson. There is, since Pope John Paul II, a Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. It's, like the French Academy and other academies that concentrate in a certain area, to concentrate on the social sciences. And a friend of mine, an American, was recently elected, and I saw a copy of his appointment letter he showed me, and in it congratulates him on his election and points out that one of the purposes of the Pontifical Academy is to distinguish new possibilities from old errors. In other words, to learn by experience. Now, the third thing I want to do, Dean Wu and others suggested that I say at least a little bit about Caritas and Veritate, the latest in a series of letters which since 1891 the popes have from time to time addressed to the world at large. That's why they're called an encyclical, to the whole cycle of nations, on the economy. Pope Benedict released his just some months ago. A few comments about it. Why Caritas? Why Veritas? Harvard's motto, is Veritas, truth. And Caritas is a special kind of love. In a moment, I'm going to try to differentiate it from other forms of love. The great theologian, Protestant theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, probably the greatest theologian we've ever had in America, died in 1972, once wrote that compared to Protestants, Catholics place community at the center of social thinking. Now, he was very critical of Catholicism, but this is one aspect that he liked. It's one reason we call it social thought, for instance. Why do we do that? This is my fourth point. Because Catholics put so much emphasis on the Trinity. We sign ourselves with the sign of the cross. And in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now to Muslims, this is sheer blasphemy, horror. And to Jews as well. It seems to be polytheism, not monotheism. It's not the way we see it, but there is an important lesson in this fundamental point. The Trinity, we believe because we are told, because that's the way the New Testament presents it, is a communion of divine persons. God is described as issuing forth in the Word, who is in fact also an incarnate person. And then God's love issues forth in the love of the Son, and then His love for the Father in the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of love. Now, a friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine, asked me one day, under the bright sun at Aspen as we were having lunch, Mike, I've known you a long time. What do you Catholics mean when you say the Trinity? He said, "What goes through your head?" I don't get it. And I stammered a while, and then I looked at his wife and him, and I said, "Andrew, what's the most important thing to you in your whole life? What do you think is the experience, the activity, which is the most like God, the most divine?" I said, "Could it be your love for Elaine and hers for you, and the loves of your children? Do you know anything in the world, in the whole line of your experience, that is better than that or more godly than that?" I said, "That's what we're pointing to. We do not think of God as a solitary, icy being, the way Aristotle did or Plato, solitary, but rather as himself a communion, himself a form of love. And so powerfully that from it two are generated. God is teeming, as it were, with understanding and with love, the two characteristics which we can discern from creation itself. That from God issued a world replete with understanding, inviting our reflection, inviting our investigation, supporting hundreds of years, thousands of years of scientific investigation, always finding more and more to be found. There is nothing in the universe if not understanding all the way through. And then, in the same time, already the Jewish Testament tells us that God in the creation looked at it and saw that it was good. That is, he loved it. This is not a vicious or a hateful God, but one who wished to diffuse his own love through everything. Now this is my fifth point. This turns out to be a very good starting place. Reflecting on the Trinity, difficult as it is a very good practical starting place for thinking about questions like globalization, questions like economies and various systems of economy, questions of polities and questions of culture. We are, after all, one human community. St. Augustine, already in the 4th century, it's easy sort of to remember his birth. I always had trouble remembering his birth date, year, until a friend pointed out to me that it was exactly 1,600 years before the Cleveland Indians won the American League pennant after World War II. That clinched it. 354. It sticks in my head very vividly now. But he wrote after the 400s began, after the terrible sack of Rome by the barbaric peoples from the north. Women carried off, men crippled so they could not fight again, marbles and stone and gold torn down and carried away. He wrote about a set of reflections on the future of the world, which he called the City of God. But the basic move he makes within it is we actually live in the city of man. The city of God is what it will be like when God is all in all, when God's nature suffuses everything. But meanwhile, we are in a world, nothing plainer, of selfishness, of mistrust. Your wife says in the morning, "Good morning," and you say to yourself, what did she mean by that? He writes that judges are the occupation that we hold to be the most bound by integrity. But even judges don't know most of the time whom to believe. They have to weigh and give the balance of the evidence to one side or the other. They cannot be sure. And he says, untruth, therefore, ignorance, pervade our lives, even with those with whom we are most intimate. We can't possibly plumb them to the bottom, and it's also true they can't plumb themselves to the bottom. I know my wife would get angrier than anything if I ever said I understood her. I always knew what she was going to do. She didn't want to be understood in that way. So we are secrets even to ourselves. Now, the point of Augustine's writing this is the meaning of human history. He's the first to conceive of an idea of progress. The Greeks and Romans had an idea of the world as returning back to first principles or best moments, highest moments. And you can see it in Greek art and even in Roman art. This honoring of the gods of the past, the classics of the past. But he saw that God made the world and gave it a point, a direction. And it was in the direction of slowly, very slowly, changing the city of man into the city of God. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, is the prayer the Lord taught us. He didn't think that it would be possible in his lifetime to see the end of torture. But he saw that torture was universal and plainly opposed to the Christian Gospels. He didn't think he would see in the end of his lifetime the end of slavery. But slavery was written into the laws of every city. That's how they built things. That's why they went to war, to go get slaves to do the heavy work. But we should. It was only in 1982 that the United Nations could agree on an anti-torture provision. It wasn't easy to come to that consensus. Slavery still exists in places in the world. And now a new form of slavery, sexual slavery, whose dimensions are only slowly being uncovered. So this fifth point of mine about caritas is that it gives us a vision of a whole community moving from the world of, let me say it, sin. Reinhold Niebuhr once said, original sin is the one proposition of Christianity that you don't have to believe in. You just have to use some introspection. You know the things you should have done that you didn't do, and the things you should not have done that you did. And you see recurrently your faults. Things you know are unreasonable, but you do. Now a few words about the meaning of caritas. That's my sixth point. In Latin and Greek, there are 4 or 5, even more, words for love, where in English we only have one. Hey guys, could you knock it off up there? Just knock it off. I'm only going to take an hour of your time, so, let me have it peacefully. Because I feel the need of your attention, and if I don't get it, it disorients my thought. The most common word for love in Latin and its form in Greek is amor. Amor is what the woman sees in the Bible who, across the field, a couple of miles away already sees the form, which somehow she knows is a man. And somehow, even so, she knows will be her husband. It's a lovely story, and it's true. Sometimes you see a person, a woman or a man on the other side of the room. And I know the first time I looked into my wife's eyes, it was a blind date. I was not expecting anything. And I was gone. That's amor, which is the most general kind of attraction. It's so general that the Greeks even used amor, or the Latins even used amor, for the movement of the stars in their orderly way, and of the sun. Dante wrote one of the most beautiful lines in the whole Divine Comedy. L'amore che muove il sole ed altre stelle. Love which moves the sun and all the other stars. The force that makes the cosmos go in an orderly way. That's amor. You're moved despite yourself. Then there's affectio, which is like, did you hug your children tonight? Or a cat sitting on your lap purring. It's a word that comes from passion, which is being moved. The attention is moving. But it doesn't mean any great commitment from the cat. And then there is dilexio, which is now moving beyond amor and moving beyond affectio. You can feel affection toward an awful lot of people, toward almost everyone. Personally, for example, I have affection for almost every politician, even though I live and work in Washington. I think they have a very difficult life, and on the whole, I like them. I've met a handful I really don't like. I won't bore you with there because it's not particularly partisan. But the point is, you can feel affection for an awful lot of people. If you sign a letter affectionately, you're not committing yourself to a lot. But dilexio, the next form of love, is based on the word for election or choice. It's when deliberately and with commitment you choose this man or this woman as a friend. It can be a man with a man and a woman with a woman. But it's particularly true of marriage, of matrimony, which Aquinas called the most beautiful, the most wonderful of all human relations. The main part of it is the deliberation. You think about what you're doing, and the commitment. It's dilexio. You choose. I'll come back in just a minute to another part of that. And then amicizia is next. Amicizia is friendship. It's when your love is requited by the gift of another. It's a terrible thing in your life if you've ever been in love with someone and really chose them in your heart, but they don't choose you. They reject you. Unrequited love it's an important thing to go through, but it isn't pleasant. Amicizia is that wonderful state in which the love that you have for your friend is reciprocated in friendship from the other. Now, I could go on, but there's only one more love I want to talk about. It's caritas itself. What is caritas? And here I'm starting this is my sixth point. It's not amor, it's not affectio, it's not dilexio, it's not amicizia. It's the love hidden in the phrase, God is love. It's the love which causes the Father to express it in word, both in the eternal word and in Jesus become man. I know Muslims and Jews think we're crazy for this, and others may think what they want, but this is what Catholics hold. And then is expressed in the love between the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of love. So the God in whom Christians believe is abundant in understanding and in love. Caritas is God's own love for Son and Holy Spirit, and then a love, in the secondary sense, a love which He diffuses through the world. It's the inner spirit of holiness, if you wish. Only God generates caritas. My seventh point is, He chooses, it's His choice, He didn't have to do this, to diffuse this love among all human beings. To give every human being a chance to love in a way which is not just their own, but His. Lift us to higher levels, if you want. As far as you're willing to go. As far as you're willing to abandon yourself to Him. Now, what is love? in a very simple way, love is to will the good of the other as other. I mean, it's for a man to will the good of his wife as his wife. Now, there's a little bit of mystery in here. It's to will the good of the other, not the way you see it, and maybe not the way she sees it. Maybe your wife has certain illusions about things. And it's certain that the man has illusions about things. As far as I can see, the whole business of marriage is to bind yourself for life to somebody who is bound to tell you about yourself all the things you really don't want to hear. In a marriage, it can't exist without truthfulness gradually arrived at. And it's pretty painful. And when your wife is finished, your children begin. I mean, it's a thankless vocation, marriage and children. Oh, by the way, one thing people don't tell you about matrimony that they really should, it's essentially a transportation service. I mean, whatever else they say, you're going to spend a very big chunk of your life taking your kids to meetings of various sorts. You might as well be ready. So love is to will the good of the other, but then there's one more quality to it, which especially Christians call attention to. It's to lay down one's life for the other. Greater love than this no man has, the New Testament tells us. And we see it in God's own Son. You often have to look and say, gosh, if this is what God does to his own Son, what hope is there for the rest of us? There's going to be lots of suffering in our lives. Lots of disappointment, lots of pain, lots of brokenness. It's part of being able to love with this other degree of love. To lay down your life. Now, Pope Benedict, and my 8th point is, he stresses caritas in truth, in veritas, caritas in veritas. And my general reading of the letter would be like this. It's a little facetious, but not too much. I myself, pressured by one of my critics of 10 or 15 years ago, David Schindler, began reflecting on the role of caritas in business and in politics and so forth. And so I was really happy, and I think I wrote some of the first things about this. When I was in graduate school, I had wanted to write my thesis on caritas and Thomas Aquinas. Just a beautiful theme, and he's got a little treatise on it that's just wonderful. But the English translation of it is very, very bad. So anyway. I like what Pope Benedict does with caritas. He gives a deeper dimension to Catholic social thought than it's ever had, which I've tried to lead you into here. It's pretty deep. I was teaching at Stanford as a very young man, my first teaching job after graduate school. And once the students prevailed upon me to, it's a small seminar, why don't we meet around the pool? It was like the end of February, a beautiful day. And just like South Bend. And I was young, so I said yes. And we're sitting around the pool, and one of the young ladies is twisting her nose plug so, and it flies out of her hand and plops into the pool. And the other guys made as if to go get it for her. And she said, wait, I want Professor Novak to get it. And I say I was young and I was impressed. And I said, why me? And she gave me that cold look that only a woman can give you and says, because nobody I know can dive down deeper, stay down longer, and come up drier. Well, you experienced that yourself. So, but I think that may I have you put up the first one on Bangladesh? I think what this letter lacks still. What this letter lacks still. We have the right thing here. Is a little bit more factual knowledge about the world, a little bit more veritas. More veritas, please, would be my comment. In talking about globalization, the letter tends to take a sort of negative view. It doesn't quite say that. Look, I think the letter is a product of staff work. And I think the staff work was moving in one direction, and when you see Benedict's hands, it's trying to make something to correct it, move in the other direction. But no matter, in globalization, it's mostly spoken of with negative connotations. Holy Cross community has been active in Bangladesh My brother was a Holy Cross priest there, was murdered there many years ago. So we've stayed rather close to Bangladesh. And I've been happy to see the terrific progress since 1970, in 25 years. Mortality is one of the best ways to see how people are doing about poverty. People live longer. The population of Bangladesh has expanded from something like not quite 50 million, I'm doing this by memory, but between 30 and 50 million just after World War II to something like 150 million now. It's that order of magnitude. I may have the figures wrong, but that's order of magnitude. People talk about a population explosion. It doesn't feel that way to families in Bangladesh. It's terrific to have your babies live. And it's terrific to have the parents live. So these are terrific signs of a major shift in possibilities of life. And I could give you hundreds more. One other, in just about this same period, not yet, Tonya, but in just about the same period, between the two of them, China and India raised 500 million people out of poverty. Never have so many people been raised themselves out of poverty as in that 20-year period, 1980 to 2000. And it's going on. It's all done through business, through the adoption of the business system by China. The Chinese are making a big bet that they can have a free economy, or pretty free economy, and still maintain political control. I'm willing to take that bet and say it's not going to work. Sooner or later, there's going to be enough smart business people who are going to recognize they're a lot smarter than the commissars, and who are going to demand a more representative kind of government. But we'll see. History will unfold on that. But the enormous thing is, 25 years ago, the poorest continent of the world was Asia. I remember when I was young, we used to fast for a day to send money to Asia, and when we didn't finish our plates, our parent would say, "Remember the poor children in China." And I always wondered what the fact that I cleaned my plate have to do with poor children in China. But anyway, we were very aware of it. That's no longer the case. Now I want to start down another track a little bit. Two more practical ideas. In Caritas et Veritas, Benedict makes a law, as all Catholic thinkers do, of two terms, the common good and social justice. I'm going to deal with social justice tonight. There were two enormous transformations in the 19th century. This is my 9th point. Two big events. The move from countryside to cities. In 1820, in all of France, there were only about 20 factories which employed as many as 20 people. The factory movement was just beginning. But people wanted more goods than they could find in the countryside. Victor Hugo wrote in 1830, or wrote about 1830, wrote later, and he called the people les misérables, the wretched ones. Thomas Jefferson, when he went there during the War of Independence, found that American slaves lived a better life, ate better than the peasants of France, who had an extremely restricted diet. You can look all this up in Histories of Economics, which is one of the most interesting fields ever. That was one event, the tremendous move, and it's still going on. The cities around the world are growing to 10 million, 20 million, and the countryside is being, because it's not enough to have a roof over your head and enough to eat. People want electric lights. They want sewage systems that work. They want to send their kids to college. Many of you have been to poor areas of Latin America and elsewhere, and you see kids in sweatshirts. Harvard, Yale, etc. The second great fact, noted by Hannah Arendt, the great German social thinker, For the first time in history, masses of the world's poor exited out of poverty within one generation. And that was happening in the United States. It had never happened before in that large a number. It was hard to discover poor people in the United States towards the end of the 18th century. And this created the great Das Sozialproblem, as the Germans called it, which makes it sound weightier. The social problem that Marx began writing about. If people can move out of poverty, then poverty isn't necessary. So what's the cause of it? What's the cause of poverty? And the whole turmoil of the 19th century leading into the 20th century was off on that street. So the move from the countryside to the cities and the end of, the possible solution of the social problem. If some people can move out of poverty, why not everybody? Well, Marx, it turns out, asked the wrong question. Suppose you find out the answer to the question, what is poverty? Terrific. Now you can make more poverty. The interesting question is, what is the cause of the wealth of nations? How could you systematically, in a sustained way, bring it about that the majority, in the end, the entirety of all the world, could move out of poverty into some form that might be called middle class? Now, the worry of Leo XIII in 1891, and this is my 10th point, how can the Catholic lay people best live out their faith amid these new things? His letter was called Of the New Things. The Catholic faith, Christian faith generally, was handed on through families. And generally families were living on a farm or small villages. Most of the stories in the New Testament, most of the images are farming images. Sheep, shepherds, vines, wheat, grains, and so forth. And for the first time, people were living in environments where parents worked separately from children. They used to work all together on the farm. There's still a few places in the world where you see that. Not a majority any longer. And how will Christian faith survive if the family breaks down? And if the patterns of close living in the family and interdependence break down? My own family experienced this, and I suspect the family of many of you in this room. If you go back to the time of your grandparents or a generation before that, mine lived in eastern Slovakia, part of Czechoslovakia, but not yet. Part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, little country called Slovakia, where they had worked for centuries for the count who lived in the castle. And they worked as serfs, woodcutters, and so forth, for the count, who now lives in Canada, turns out. The essence of their lives, they could be good Christians and good citizens, good subjects of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, if they did three things: pray, pay, and obey. They had to pay a percentage of everything they did to the count. Pray and obey. They did. And the general view was that life is predetermined for them. Wherever you were born, that's what you do. Johansen, the son of Johann, a blacksmith to a blacksmith, farmer to a farmer. Now, my grandparents moved to America. And suddenly they were no longer subjects, they were sovereigns. They chose the leaders, hired them and fired them, who were only in for a certain term. And if there was injustice on the job, they needed to form their own associations to combat it. Insurance companies, in case a roofer fell off a roof and couldn't work any longer. The others had pitched in a little fund every week, and from this they paid to that family. And if you look at most of the ethnic groups in America, you'll discover these insurance agencies are still going. To move from being subject to the emperor to being citizen sovereigns. It was a tremendous psychological shift. Also a great psychological shift was to recognize that here there was no count to take care of. There were no fields there already. They just had to work. If they wanted to survive and to prosper, they had to use their own initiative and make their own choices. And you were given the understanding that your fate was determined at least as much by yourself as by circumstances. Not true in all cases, but in the vast majority of cases. Now, my 11th point is Leo XIII had in view two enemies that he was terribly worried about: socialism or communism and individualism. And he was worried about socialism or communism because they would become a new system of tyranny. He believed, he wrote, that equality among human beings is unnatural. It can only be enforced by tyranny. And it will destroy society. Why? Because he said, to have a community, you need people of many different temperaments and talents and interests and ambitions. Because there are many different kinds of work to be done. And if it's going to be a happy society, people have to have a multiplicity of choices in which to do this. So he wrote, all strivings by the socialist are in vain. He's predicting in 1891 exactly the sort of deficiencies in communism that people began writing about after 1989. It's just stunning. He had 10 predictions. They were all verified in how people were describing their lives since 1917. He was worried about individualism because he said there's so many things that individuals can't do alone. He did not use this, but to use Alexis de Tocqueville's image, if you only have individuals in the face of the powerful state, they're too weak. And all they can do is form a mob. They can associate together, but a mob is not a community. If you want a community, you have to have individuals who know how to join associations, who know how to cooperate with others, who know how to work together with others, to form associations for their own purposes, to give some social resistance, a social thickness to society. We call it civil society today. So Leo XIII expressly is looking for a new virtue for the new times. And he sees it as the only cure to socialism and to individualism. It's important to see the two enemies he had in mind. He became known later as the Pope of Association, because this is the theme he stressed over and over again. And this gave him the key to what he meant by gives us the key to what he meant by social justice. A new virtue to be practiced by individuals to prevent the world from moving towards socialism or being lost in individualism. In his view, individualism always leads to socialism. Individualism always leads to a breakdown in which the state becomes the solution. My 13th point, what is this new virtue, this new habit of social justice? It makes human beings capable of social action without turning to the state. It's a habit, it's learned by individuals, so it's rooted in the individual. That's one thing that's very important to see. Social justice is a virtue practiced by individuals, learned by individuals. And in some countries, it's much better learned than in others. And if it's not learned, it's very hard to have a democracy or a dynamic economy. The particular virtue that you learn, that individuals need to learn, is how to associate with others, how to be good teammates, how to cooperate, how to work with others, even strangers. You can send, these days you can start a political campaign in New Hampshire and ask for volunteers. And there'll be young people who take off from school from Dartmouth and Michigan and all across the country. And they'll show up, they know how to use a Rolodex, and nobody gives them orders, nobody's there to tell them what to do, and they can figure out how to mount a campaign at 21 or 22 years old. It's a skill Americans have. I once had a friend in Italy I talked to, had lived in Cleveland, Ohio. I asked him once, why did he leave Cleveland and come back to Italy? Because he says, in America you work too much. You work 8 hours, come home, and then go to meetings. Too many meetings in America. And he said, in Italy, you come home at 4 o'clock, you have a shave and a haircut can last an hour. You have dinner over 3 hours. In Italy, si viva. You live. In America, si lavora. Too much work. It made a certain sense to me. You've been going to meetings. Well, like I say, one reason you're going to have so much transportation to do is that your kids are going to meetings after school. Every kind of meeting imaginable. Tai Chi, Scouts, soccer, softball, you name it. And that's how Americans develop persons of a certain character, a certain virtue. A friend of mine in Poland saw on sequential days a busload of Russians come in on their way to Paris, stayed overnight. They get out of the bus, march into the hotel, leave the fakinos to carry the bags in. The next day, a group of Americans come, students, in a bus. The strongest guys go in and pull the bags out from underneath. Everybody else lines up and takes bags in. Nobody gave orders. They just spontaneously formed an association to do it. Americans do that. And a lot of other people do it too, but it's an extraordinary skill. So this is a new habit learned in the last 2 or 3 centuries. And it has a new aim. The aim of these associations is to go outside the family, to better conditions of the neighborhood, paint the swings in the neighborhood, or dig a new well, as in a village in Poland that I know of, or of the local city, or of the region, or of the nation, or of the world, like as I said, the Red Cross and other organizations. The point of social justice is it's a virtue, it's singular, but it's social in 2 ways. It's social in the capacities you have to learn to work with others, to associate, and it's social in its purpose, in its end. So in the substance of the virtue and in its final cause, in its end, it's a new and different sort of virtue. I want to point out next, just in passing, that this is a non-ideological concept. That is, it's as true of the left as of the right. The left is fantastic at organizing. And conservatives are becoming increasingly so. And now the last point I want to make is business can be, it is in its nature, and it can be if you do it, a central agent of social justice. If you can give jobs, create new services, new goods, or new ways of delivering same, if you can give training, if you can teach associational virtues, trust, friendship, mutual assistance, civic consciousness, to those who work with you, you've done a tremendous service to society. And you've given society a way to move out of poverty and to build the grassroots, the net roots of democracy. Finally, business can be a great vehicle of what Dostoevsky called the most important of all virtues, humble charity. He argued the world is saved by humble charity, by people you don't know about, who do acts of great generosity. All kinds of daughters giving up a good portion of their lives to care for their mother in cancer, or an aunt that nobody is caring for some years. The amount of sacrifice that human beings do for one another is extraordinary. We don't see it, it's not written about, but the degree of holiness among so many people is amazing. And my very last sentence to you would be this. Remember that when Jesus chose a vocation, he went into business as a carpenter. Thank you very much.
Would you be willing to take a few
Absolutely.
questions? Anybody have questions?
In forms of redistribution and more benevolent the spirit of gift, with the objective of raising people out of poverty and then how the objectives and alright, so the redistribution of all, how do you reconcile that, especially now in such a climate where people, especially in light of health reform, are so sorry for this. Like you said, the church is against socialism, but with redistribution of wealth, we see it doesn't work for people.
Well, there are of redistribution of wealth, which I wish the Vatican were more aware of. I don't think it understands the way a large part of the world works. It just doesn't have the experience. One is through the state, and that's the way Europeans generally choose to do it. We have not chosen that way. We have chosen to do redistribution by allowing people the free exploration of their own talents. Almost everybody who came to America in the last 200 years came poor. Very few came with educations or with money. But the vast majority of us are no longer poor. And we did it in humble ways. I mean, not everybody was a genius or anything like that. But people went into businesses, roofers and painters and auto mechanics and 100 other jobs, and they're living much better than their grandparents. And they hope their children are going to go to university and do much better. Jack Kemp discovered when he was running for Congress in Buffalo, after playing for the Buffalo Bills, that the garbage men, the servicemen that he met, had no difficulty understanding tax cuts. Because they believed their kids were going to be the first ones in their family to make money. That's why they sent them to the university. And he didn't want the government taking their money from them just after they started to earn it. So he had no trouble explaining it to ordinary people. He had trouble in the universities. So I don't want to give a... I'm going to make a partisan point. For the last years, one party has said that there are 47 million uninsured. Did you notice in the president's talk almost 2 weeks ago now that he said there are 30 million? Well, what happened to the 17 million? What a bunch of us knew. They were illegal immigrants. And try to get the American people to vote for that or to think that's a good social policy. Legal immigrants is something different. And if you look at the other 30 million, you discover that a very high percentage of them, I better not quote it from memory, earn $75,000 or more a year. But they're young and they're healthy and they think they're invulnerable. And rather than pay $4,000 or $5,000 of their money in health insurance, they'd rather take their chances and go 4 or 5 years, 6 years without any big problems. Or contrary-wise, they can buy catastrophic insurance to cover them in cases of accidents or cancer or something like that and pay the rest out of pocket. Well, it seems to me people should be allowed that reasonable choice. I know it offends other people terribly. If everybody doesn't get it, something's wrong. I don't believe that's true. The mission of the church is not socialist. It is social. Yeah.
And I noticed that 10 and 9 was still included with his thoughts about ethical business making. I wondered if you decided to keep it in there.
No, I decided against it. The publisher decided against it. And I think it's. I wanted to add another 2 chapters too, and they wanted to keep it as it was. I'm going to go back to them again, but I want to make a point. One reason I didn't mind it too much when it all happened is it makes the point of the book. Business is a moral activity. You can't escape it. And you can do evil And you can fail to do good, or you can do a lot of good. It is a moral, you can't say it's just business, it's just the bottom line. Never true. It is always an occupation which human beings are making decisions every day. I'll give you a story. A friend of mine was on the board of a big company in St. Louis where they had 4,000 people employed in East St. Louis, one of the poorest districts in the United States. And that plant, well, actually this guy was the CEO, that plant was making a profit, the worst profit in the whole company, and his board was on his back to close it. He said, not on my watch. As long as I'm a CEO, I'm not closing a plant that means so much for East St. Louis and the message that would send to our other businesses. There's a lot of discretion. I'll give you one more case. This is a Notre Dame man taught me this some years ago. He was in charge of Coca-Cola in Africa. And as they set up plants, they needed truckers, they needed people to supply lunches for the workers, they needed, and he made it a point to put Africans in business. He made it a point to set up some of the money to generate African small businesses. And he believed in the long run it would be for the good of the company, and it was. But he did that because of his lessons in social justice here at Notre Dame, so he told me.